9mm versus 40 Smith & Wesson and subcompact pistols, and what I have today is our Federal Punch ammunition. So I'm using my Taurus G2C pistols and 9mm and 40 Smith & Wesson to test this ammunition. Our Federal Punch 9mm is a 124 grain jacketed hollow point rated at 1150 feet per second. I'm assuming through a 4-inch barrel. And our 40 Smith & Wesson is a 165 grain jacketed hollow point rated at 1130 feet per second. I'm also assuming through a 4-inch barrel. So a little bit difference there in caliber. Should be a really interesting test. So our G2C pistols have 3.2-inch barrels. So we're going to go through the chronographs, see what kind of velocity and accuracy we get at the same time. Then I'm going to do my 10% clear ballistic test. So we're going to go into plain clear ballistics to see what the best potential of those cartridges are. I do a shot like that with absolutely no fabric or anything like that in the way, just to try to see if we can get hollow point expansion, because sometimes when I would put denim on these tests, I would never get hollow point expansion from the bullets clogging with denim. So I like to see what they're supposed to look like before I move on to my real world simulation. So my real world simulation is 4 layers of sweatshirt material on this first 3-inch piece that represents our pectoral muscle. After that, a 1/4-inch medium density fiberboard to represent ribs or sternum, and that'll be more of our real world simulation. So I'll do a plain clear ballistic shot with each of these, and then our real world simulation shot, and then I'm going to shoot at the steel target to see what kind of practical recoil control and accuracy I can get with these. So let's get started with this test. All right, first up we have our 9mm 124 grain jacketed hollow point rated at 1150 feet per second. I'm about 5 yards from the target. Let's see how close I get to 1150 feet per second in my little subcompact pistol here. 1107, 1097, 1092, 1101, 1107. So not too far off from a rate of velocity for being such a short barrel. Our 40 Smith & Wesson, a lot bigger bullet here, rated at 1130 feet per second. I don't think we'll even come close to that, but we'll see what we get here. See how close we get to 1130 feet per second. Not sure if that was a read or not. 1098, 1099, 1051, 1104. So, you know, pretty much the same velocity overall as that 9mm, but we're working with a bullet that's like, I want to say 41 grains heavier. So quite a bit more power with this 40 Smith & Wesson. A bit more recoil, but it wasn't unbearable to shoot. It was pretty mild to shoot. So let's hit our ballistics gel block, see how these compare. All right, our best potential shot in the plain clear ballistics, just plain clear ballistics, to hopefully get hollow point expansion and see what these bullets are supposed to look like. So 9mm. All right, let's hit that with our 40 Smith & Wesson. Let's go take a look. All right, so not a huge difference with either of those, other than, you know, there's definitely more damage with that 40 Smith & Wesson along, you know, the first 3 inches and the path as well. So definitely on our top here with our 40, a little bit greater damage than the 9mm on the bottom there. But very similar overall as far as, you know, looks like percentage of expansion and penetration and all of that. So with our 9mm, really good damage for what it is, you know. And that's one of the things I see with 9mm. It's often a problem that, you know, ammo companies don't make rounds that energy dump very well. It looks like this punch does energy dump pretty well with our 9mm. So got really good damage. We went right to about 17 3/4 inches of penetration. So that's really good overall. Now we look at our 40 Smith & Wesson, a little more damage, and we went to 17 inches even. So both of these had a lot of energy dump and then went real deep in a straight line. So that's pretty perfect as far as terminal ballistics go. So let's put on our denim, put in our MDF, see how they compare in more of our real world simulation. All right, 4 layers of sweatshirt material, 3 inches of clear ballistics, a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard for our ribs. Let's see how these do in more of our real world simulation, 9mm. All right, let me set that back up. We'll hit it with the 40 Smith & Wesson. All right, 40 Smith & Wesson through more of our real world simulation. Let's see how this does. Let's go take a look. All right, I generally have to set that back up between each shot with the MDF shot because typically the MDF gets shifted around and the denim kind of shifts around too. So what we got going on here is some pretty good performance, I would say, overall. Our 9mm actually has more energy dump and damage in this block than the 40 Smith & Wesson. And this is really interesting here because when we look at this first 3-inch piece here, our 40 on the top has a lot more energy dump than our 9mm on the bottom. And then when we look at the medium density fiberboard, our impact with the 9mm is just a tiny little hole, yet we can see with the 40 Smith & Wesson that it was fully expanded before it hit this. So more than likely, you know, the pedals bent back with this as where the 9mm punched through and then started really expanding. So it looks like it started expanding after going through that medium density fiberboard, creating a lot of damage and really big pedals. And what we're looking at here is a penetration of 16.5 inches of penetration. Now our 40 Smith & Wesson, that's not bad at all. It went a little bit far. We're looking at about 20.25 inches of penetration. Looks like the expansion isn't quite as big, and I think part of that's just from the MDF impact. So, you know, honestly, looking at both of these, I would say our 9mm looks a little more impressive. That being said, you can't discount the energy dump in this first 3 inches before it hit that rib simulation. So it's really hard for me to say which one did better here. At first glance, it looks like the 9mm did better, but I would say overall they're probably about equal, because sometimes you can't quantify extra energy hitting a target, because sometimes that will make a projectile more effective even though it doesn't necessarily show. So, you know, both of them did pretty well. So let me pull these out of the block. We'll take a close-up look at them, then I'll show our steel, see what kind of practical shootability I can get with these. All right, so here's a close-up look at these bullets going through plain gel. Here is our 9mm. Had really good expansion overall. That's a little P on the back of that bullet to indicate punch. These are very similar to HSTs. I believe they have a banded locked core the way HST does too. So they're actually really good bullets for being an economy brand here. 40 Smith & Wesson looks just as good, if not better, than our 9mm. Really good expansion, all of that. Now going through our medium density fiberboard, this is where things change up a little bit. Here's our 9mm. Really huge flowered petals coming out. Generally I see that when, you know, we don't have quite enough energy for those petals to peel back. But that did create a ton of damage in that gel. Now when we look at our 40 Smith & Wesson going through our medium density fiberboard, this is very, very typical. Decent expansion, petals peel back a little bit, but definitely smaller than that 9mm. So, you know, both of these have really good attributes as far as terminal ballistics go. It's really hard for me to say which one did better. I would say classically, if we look at some of the more classic performance I see, where you get a very consistent performance and it changes a little bit through our medium density fiberboard, our 40 Smith & Wesson is pretty classic performance. We get a little smaller expansion going through the medium density fiberboard versus plain gel, and it does pretty well. With our 9mm, this is kind of indicative of having just not enough power. That being said, there's nothing wrong with having wicked huge petals coming out like that, which I would say would be pretty effective. It just didn't go as deep as what that 40 did. So honestly, both of these are very similar. One isn't necessarily better than the other here. I would say our 40 Smith & Wesson might have a slight ballistics edge as far as stopping a threat, because it did have a lot more power. but our 9mm for what it is, you know, there's a lot of 9mm out there. I've tested a lot of them. I've tested a lot of them through short barrels. Most of them don't perform as good as this. So I would say for a 9mm, that's pretty good. So both of them are pretty good. So that's a close-up look at those. All right, so I ran out of target paint, so I'm just going to stay here at 12 yards and just kind of see what kind of practical recoil control and shootability I can get with both of these. So I'm just going to get a sight picture, line up those sights, and then pop off these rounds as fast as I think I can hit the target and see how these two compare. So here's our 9mm. All right, not too bad for shootability. There's actually a little more recoil with that than typical 9mm. So it's a pretty powerful little cartridge, this little subcompact. So 40 Smith & Wesson, let's see how this does. With that, I actually had to loosen my grip a little bit because there's a lot of pain going on with that extra recoil and this gritty texture and the gap between the magazine and the pistol. So it's a little bit harder for me to shoot. I can't say that the accuracy and shootability is a whole lot worse than the 9mm, but it is definitely a little bit harder to shoot. So looking at both of these, I would say both of them did pretty well. Honestly though, looking at the whole picture here, I would say in this particular ammo, I think our 9mm is more ideal because we have a lot more shootability with that. It's a pretty powerful little cartridge, and this little pistol did really good damage after going through that rib simulation. So I'm not really sure if it's really beneficial for a cartridge to expand before it hits like ribs, or if it's more beneficial for it to expand after. In my studying of ballistics, it does look like stuff that expands immediately tends to do a little bit better. So if I had to judge all of this, I would say the 40 Smith & Wesson would probably be more effective if you made a shot on an attacker. So when it comes to terminal ballistics, the 40 Smith & Wesson wins, but the 9mm did really well in its own right and was a lot easier to shoot. So that would make it kind of our winner here between the two of these. And don't get me wrong, I love 40 Smith & Wesson, and I'm telling you right now, it's going to be more effective if you can make a shot with it, even on this little subcompact, than what the 9mm is. But most people are not going to want to deal with the type of recoil that 40 Smith & Wesson has. And honestly, if I was going to carry one of these, I feel a little more confident in these little short pistols with the 9mm because I know that I can make those shots a lot easier. Now we go up to full-size guns. Our 40 Smith & Wesson all day long is twice as good of a cartridge in my opinion than 9mm, but in these little subcompacts, I think I would pick this particular 9mm. So that's what you get today. Interesting little test. So as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.